phone Mark Miller, author of Jolt, Stories of Trauma and Transformation. Mark, thanks for sticking with us through the break there.
My pleasure.
So just a recap of the question where I was, and I might just build on it a little bit. What I've noticed, this is just, you know, as a paraprofessional, I'm not a mental health professional or anything of that nature, and I'm not trying to say or claim this. It's just what I saw working with people, is that when there was an avenue to direct their energy, it allowed, I don't have words for this, but it allowed sort of a forward motion instead of a circular replaying of traumatic events, basically. And so that forward motion, right, that like instead of reliving it or dwelling, but instead putting it into something that is going to move forward. Does that at all make sense the way I phrased it?
That resonates for me. I think what I found in my research for the book is that there's this strong desire people have to put back together a sense of meaning in their lives, that traumatic events kind of blow up your sense of context about your life in many respects. And so there's a strong hunger to restore a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. And so these kinds of missions that you're describing would fit that. The second thing that can be very valuable to people is the social aspect of this. So, it puts you into a social milieu in many respects. You're working with others towards something, and that's very reinforcing and healing. But one point that I always like to make about this and really emphasize is that in no way am I trying to say with this book that the message is that there should be some expectation of growth for people who suffer trauma. And I've had a number of conversations about this with the psychologists who treat people in clinical settings who have experienced trauma. And they are always very careful never to try to tell people that this is where they ought to head, because it can actually be, add to their suffering. What do you mean? I'm suffering from this horrible thing to happen to me, and now you're telling me, gee, you ought to be growing. And what's the matter with me? I'm not growing. And so this is not something that happens in all cases. And, I am not trying to send out a message to people that, hey, this is the thing, that this is the solution necessarily. It's more reporting on the phenomenon, and it does occur, and it occurs with a reasonable amount of frequency. But I'm at pains in the book, I discuss this in depth, not to try to convey that there's something wrong with people who don't experience growth following trauma. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And I mean, it goes into, if you think that you're going to be able to solve the complexities of life, or if anyone ever tells you, here's all you got to do, that's snake oil, right? Yeah. It's more of a description and a sharing of stories. This is from what I'm talking about, of what I've seen, and it sounds like that's what your book is also
very much
talking about, is sharing these stories. And if a person can grab it and learn from it something, find value in it, it can show a path forward.
And I think, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to interject that I think, one of the questions I get a lot, you get this from like book agents and publishers when you're pitching books. It's like, well, who's the audience for your book? And I always would laugh, because trauma is a universal human experience. We all experience it at one time or another in different ways. And so I think what's so interesting about the book is really narrative storytelling. It's journalistic in nature. It's not, it's not a book about psychology, although it's somewhat guided by the best research and clinical writing about this. But, I take off from there to tell stories. So hence the name of the book, Jolt, Stories of Trauma and Transformation. It really is emphasis on the stories. And so, I think there is a lot that people can take away from this. And, maybe even finding ways to, whatever traumatic things that are going on in your own life, how can I maybe find a way to focus in on that and leverage it, if you will, towards change. And so many of the people I interviewed talk about how they would not even want to trade back the traumatic experience if they could wave a magic wand and do it, because they so highly value the change that it's brought to their lives. And I think so many people have a hunger for change and finding more sense of meaning in their lives. And you know, there are many ways to get there beyond going through something very traumatic, but these traumatic stories, I think, offer a lot of insight into, you know, how one way that change can occur in your life.
Thom Hartmann's program here that we're on. Thom oftentimes he has a book club, and there's a lot of like synergy between this book and some of the things that Thom's talking about. So I do think that Thom's audience here are very well acquainted with this idea and pulling some knowledge from this idea and from the stories. I obviously come to a lot of things through this frame of like, then we can direct things into building power and activism to build on for policy change that, you know, benefit the people over Wall Street, the greedy liars on Wall Street. But there's also just the great healingness that the human mind is actually amazingly powerful for good and for bad. And that is something that I've found in my own life, just in my work and personally, that when you are dealing with something traumatic, which we all deal with, it's life. Life is beautiful because it is so sad sometimes, right? So like you see that especially through loss. So when you lose someone, it's like the negative space of how important and how much love there was for that person. So these are traumas that I think everyone is familiar with. So go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I was so inspired by the people I met writing this book who have just, you know, gone through such incredible pain, and yet they are displaying all this courageous behavior out there, you know, working for the greater good. Their sense of empathy and compassion, as I describe it in the book, is it's like it's been radically exploded, you know. The normal
Mark
sort
Miller,
of circles
thank
of
you
empathy.
so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program. Jolt, Stories of Trauma and Transformation. You can find out more about it at thomhartmann.com.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.